In the gleaming crystalline towers of Zephyr Prime, where the universe's most brilliant mathematical minds gathered to contemplate the mysteries of existence, Professor Claxon Brightbrain stood before a holographic equation that stretched across 3 walls of his laboratory. The equation pulsed with an ominous blue light, as if it were mocking him personally. Claxon, whose name was apparently chosen by parents with either tremendous optimism or a cruel sense of humor, had devoted 47 years of his considerably long Zephyrian life to this particular mathematical monster. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on his elongated purple head, were bloodshot from decades of staring at numbers that seemed to dance just out of reach of understanding. "Colleagues," he announced to his team of equally exhausted alien mathematicians, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had bet his entire career on solving the unsolvable, "we stand on the precipice of either the greatest breakthrough in galactic history, or the most spectacular academic failure since Professor Blobnox tried to prove that 2 + 2 = purple." His assistant, Dr. Quilbert Numbernose, whose proboscis actually did resemble mathematical symbols when viewed from the right angle, nervously adjusted his floating calculator. The device, roughly the size of a small moon, and powered by the contained fury of 3 dying stars, had been crunching numbers for the better part of 4 decades. It occasionally made whimpering sounds that suggested even artificial intelligence could experience existential dread. The equation in question, formally known as the infinity paradox solution, but informally called that cursed thing that ruined my life by Claxon's wife, was supposedly the key to faster-than-light travel. According to ancient Zephyrian texts discovered in a tomb that was definitely not cursed despite what happened to the archaeological team, solving this equation would unlock the secrets of folding space-time like a cosmic origami project. "Sir," squeaked Dr. Frizzle Tentacle Wing, whose name was actually quite dignified in her native language but sounded ridiculous when translated, "perhaps we should consider that we might be overcomplicating things. My grandmother always said that the simplest solution is often the correct one." Professor Claxon's 4 eyes narrowed in perfect synchronization, a feat that had taken him years to master, and was absolutely devastating in faculty meetings. "Dr. Tentacle Wing, your grandmother was a turnip farmer. This equation has confounded the greatest minds in 17 galaxies. Do you honestly believe we've been overcomplicating things for nearly half a century?" The laboratory fell silent except for the soft humming of quantum processors and the occasional sob from a junior mathematician who had recently realized he'd spent his entire adult life on what might be an elaborate form of academic self-torture. Tomorrow would bring the Galactic Academic Summit, where Claxon would present their work to representatives from across known space. It was his chance to either cement his legacy as the mathematician who unlocked the universe's greatest secret, or become a cautionary tale about the dangers of academic pride. He had no idea that his life's work was about to be solved by a hungover human with a napkin. Meanwhile, roughly 3,000 light-years away on a small blue planet that most galactic civilizations considered charmingly primitive, Danny Martinez was having what could generously be called the worst morning of his life. This was saying something, considering Danny had once accidentally set his own hair on fire while trying to explain fractions to a particularly hostile 7th grader. Danny taught remedial mathematics at Riverside Community College, an institution whose greatest claim to fame was having the cleanest bathrooms in the Tri-County area. His students were usually there because they had to be, not because they wanted to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Most days, Danny considered it a victory if he could get through the quadratic formula without someone falling asleep or asking if this would be on the test. So naturally, when first contact happened and Earth needed to send mathematical representatives to something called the Galactic Academic Summit, Danny was absolutely the last person who should have been selected. Unfortunately, the selection process had been handled by the same government department responsible for the tax code, which explained a lot about how Danny Martinez, who once spent 20 minutes trying to figure out a tip at Denny's, ended up on humanity's first interstellar diplomatic mission. "Mr. Martinez," said Agent Thompson, a woman whose entire personality seemed to consist of clipboard-related anxiety, "you understand that you'll be representing all of human mathematical achievement to advanced alien civilizations." Danny, who was still wearing yesterday's shirt and had what appeared to be breakfast burrito remnants in his beard, stared at her with the expression of a man who had clearly made some poor life choices. "There's been a mistake. I teach basic algebra to kids who think calculus is a type of kidney stone. Shouldn't you be sending like actual mathematicians, people with PhDs and lab coats and those little glasses that make you look smart?" "The selection algorithm was very thorough," Agent Thompson replied, consulting her clipboard with the devotion of a religious fanatic. "Your teaching evaluations show you have a talent for explaining complex concepts in simple terms." "That's because I don't understand the complex concepts myself," Danny protested. "I literally Googled what is math last week because a student asked me and I panicked. But the government had spoken, and 3 days later Danny found himself aboard the human delegation ship, surrounded by actual scientists, linguists, and diplomats who kept looking at him like he was a science experiment that had gone horribly wrong. Dr. Rebecca Steinberg, the mission's lead xenobiologist, tried to be encouraging. Just remember, Danny, you're representing humanity's approach to mathematics. Show them how we think differently. Great, Danny muttered, staring out at the swirling vortex of hyperspace. I'll teach them how to count on their fingers and hope for the best. The Galactic Academic Summit was held in what could only be described as the universe's most intimidating conference room. The amphitheater was carved from a single massive crystal that somehow managed to make everyone's voice sound more important than it actually was. Representatives from 47 different species sat in perfectly arranged rows, their various appendages taking notes on devices that probably cost more than Danny's annual salary. Danny sat in the human delegation section, trying to look professional while secretly playing a mental game of guess which alien looks most likely to eat me. So far, the creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a tax auditor was winning. Professor Claxon Brightbrain took the stage with the confidence of someone who had spent 47 years preparing for this exact moment. His presentation setup was nothing short of spectacular. Holographic equations materialized in mid-air, three-dimensional mathematical models rotated slowly above the audience, and a chorus of quantum computers hummed in perfect harmony. It was like watching a Broadway show, if Broadway shows were about soul-crushing mathematical complexity. Esteemed colleagues, Claxon began, his 4 eyes gleaming with the fervor of someone who had definitely practiced this speech in the mirror. Today we stand at the threshold of a new age. The infinity paradox solution, which has eluded our greatest minds for centuries, is within our grasp. The equations began flowing across the walls in cascading waves of symbols that made Danny's eyes water. It was like trying to read the Matrix, if the Matrix had been designed by someone with a serious grudge against comprehension. Danny recognized maybe 3 symbols, and one of those was probably just a squiggly line that looked familiar. Our calculations, Claxon continued, gesturing dramatically at a proof that stretched across an entire wall, show that by manipulating 17 different dimensional variables while accounting for quantum flux degradation and temporal displacement coefficients, we can achieve faster-than-light travel without violating the fundamental laws of physics. The alien audience murmured appreciatively, clearly impressed by the sheer volume of mathematical intimidation on display. Danny, meanwhile, was trying to figure out if he could sneak out to find a bathroom without causing an intergalactic incident. Dr. Quilbert Numbernose stepped forward with a floating chart that showed their progress over the decades. As you can see, we have successfully solved 97.4% of the equation. The remaining 2.6% has proven challenging. Challenging is putting it mildly, Claxon admitted, his academic pride visibly wrestling with his honesty. We believe the solution requires a fundamental breakthrough in how we conceptualize infinity itself, perhaps even a completely new branch of mathematics that transcends our current understanding. A delegate from the Andromedean Science Collective, whose head was basically a floating brain in a jar with attitude, spoke up. Professor Brightbrain, have you considered that the solution might be simpler than you're making it? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Claxon's 4 eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. Dr. Cerebrax, with all due respect, this equation has confounded 17 different species across 47 years of continuous research. I hardly think the solution is going to be simple. Danny shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to follow the mathematical concepts being thrown around like weapons. He caught glimpses of familiar-looking operations buried under layers of unnecessarily complicated notation, but every time he thought he recognized something, another wave of incomprehensible symbols would wash over it. The human delegation has been remarkably quiet, observed Ambassador Tentacula from the Rigel Diplomatic Corps, whose name Danny was pretty sure was just the word tentacle with an ad at the end. Do your mathematicians have any insights to share? All eyes turned to Danny, who suddenly felt like he was back in high school being called on when he hadn't done the homework. Which, to be fair, was exactly what was happening, just with higher stakes and more tentacles involved. Danny said. Which was definitely not how humanity's first contribution to galactic mathematics was supposed to begin. Could you maybe run through that equation one more time? Just the basic structure. During the lunch break, Danny found himself at a table that could only be described as aggressively alien. The food was purple, the drinks were fizzing in colors that didn't exist on Earth, and the conversation was entirely about mathematical theorems that made his head hurt. He'd already consumed what he hoped was alien wine but might have been industrial solvent, and was feeling pleasantly detached from the whole surreal situation. Professor Claxon sat across from him, still pontificating about dimensional mathematics to anyone within earshot. Dr. Quilbert was frantically scribbling notes on a tablet that occasionally sparked with what Danny hoped were intentional electrical discharges. The whole scene felt like a very expensive fever dream. "You see, Mr. Martinez," Claxon was saying, clearly enjoying having a captive audience. "The beauty of our approach is in its comprehensive consideration of all possible variables. We cannot simply ignore the complexity of multi-dimensional space-time manipulation." Danny nodded politely while reaching for a napkin to wipe some purple sauce off his fingers. The napkin was surprisingly high quality for alien conference catering, with a nice smooth surface that reminded him of the whiteboards he used in his classroom. Without really thinking about it, he pulled out a pen and started doodling while Claxon droned on about quantum flux coefficients. He'd always been a doodler. It helped him think, much to the annoyance of every teacher he'd ever had. Usually he drew little spaceships or stick figures, but today, probably because of all the mathematical intimidation he'd been subjected to, he found himself sketching out the basic structure of Claxon's equation as he remembered it from the presentation. "The fundamental challenge," Claxon continued, gesturing with a utensil that looked like it belonged in a surgical kit, "is reconciling the infinite regression paradox with the finite energy requirements of faster-than-light travel." Danny squinted at his napkin, trying to remember exactly how the equation had been written. He started with what he thought was the main part, then added the bits he could recall from the holographic display. As he sketched, something nagged at him. There was something familiar about the structure, like a song he'd heard before but couldn't quite place. He took another sip of the maybe wine and looked at his napkin again. The equation, stripped of all its intimidating multi-dimensional notation and fancy symbols, looked remarkably like something he'd seen before. In fact, it looked almost exactly like a problem he'd worked through with his advanced algebra class last semester, just buried under about 47 years worth of overcomplication. "Professor Claxon," Danny interrupted, which caused the entire table to fall silent with the kind of shocked quiet usually reserved for someone interrupting the Pope during Easter Mass. "Yes, Mr. Martinez," Claxon replied, his tone suggesting that humans should be seen and not heard at mathematics conferences. "I think you might have a sign error." The silence deepened. Dr. Quilbert's pen stopped sparking. Ambassador Tentacula's tentacles stopped writhing. Even the purple food seemed to stop fizzing. "I beg your pardon?" Claxon's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which was apparently the Zephyrian equivalent of "excuse me, what now?" Danny held up his napkin, suddenly very aware that he was about to either make the greatest mathematical contribution in human history, or become the first person to cause an intergalactic diplomatic incident with a piece of conference catering. "Here, look," he said, pointing to his sketched equation. "You've got this part here, where you're dealing with the infinite regression, but I think when you carried over from this step to this step you flipped the sign. It should be positive, not negative." Claxon's expression went through several stages of bewilderment before settling on what could only be described as academic horror. "Mr. Martinez, that is quite impossible. We have checked and double-checked every calculation thousands of times. Our quantum computers have verified every step. The probability of a simple sign error is astronomically small." "Yeah, but look," Danny said, warming to his topic despite the fact that he was essentially mansplaining mathematics to the galaxy's greatest mathematical mind. "If you flip that sign, the whole infinite regression thing resolves itself. See, the equation balances out, and you don't need all these extra dimensional variables to make it work." He started writing on the napkin, showing his work with the kind of basic algebraic manipulation he'd been teaching to disinterested teenagers for years. "You just factor out this part here, cancel these terms, and boom. Your faster-than-light equation, but without all the stuff that was making it impossible to solve." Dr. Quilbert had gone very pale, which was impressive considering he was naturally a sort of greenish-blue color. "Professor, he might be, I mean it's theoretically possible that we could have, that is to say, run it through the quantum computer," Claxon said quietly, his voice carrying the tone of someone who was beginning to suspect that his life's work might have been derailed by a mistake a first-year student would catch. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Danny's life. The aliens huddled around their various computing devices, inputting his corrected equation with the kind of frantic energy usually reserved for defusing bombs or trying to fix a computer right before a deadline. Finally Dr. Quilbert looked up from his tablet, his expression somewhere between amazement and existential crisis. "Professor, the equation, it works. The human is correct. We had a sign error in step 43 of our derivation. We've been solving the wrong equation for 47 years. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that archaeologists find in tombs, the kind that suggests something important has just died and been buried forever. Professor Claxon stared at the napkin like it had personally insulted his mother, his ancestors, and his entire academic lineage. His 4 eyes were doing something that Danny was pretty sure wasn't physically possible, rotating independently while somehow maintaining perfect focus on the simple algebraic correction that had just demolished nearly half a century of his life's work. 47 years, Claxon whispered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just realized he'd been pronouncing his own name wrong for decades. 47 years of research, 17 different species, 3 Nobel Prize equivalents, the most advanced quantum computers in known space. And it was a sign error. Dr. Quilbert had begun making a sound that could only be described as mathematical whimpering. His tablet was now displaying the corrected equation in beautiful, elegant simplicity, mocking them with every perfectly balanced variable. Sir, the computational requirements just dropped by approximately 94%. The energy requirements for faster-than-light travel are now within the range of what we could achieve with current technology. I need to lie down, announced Dr. Frizzle Tentacle Wing, who had gone from her usual vibrant orange to what Danny could only describe as the color of existential dread. 47 years. I missed my daughter's hatching ceremony to work on this equation. I missed 3 molting seasons. I haven't taken a vacation since the Cretaceous period of my home planet. Danny, meanwhile, was beginning to realize that he had accidentally become the center of what appeared to be a galaxy-wide academic meltdown. Around the lunch area, other alien mathematicians were pulling out their own computing devices, running the corrected equation, and making sounds that suggested they were either laughing or crying or possibly both. Mr. Martinez, Claxon said, his voice now carrying the hollow tone of someone who had just watched their entire worldview collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. Do you understand what you've done? Fixed your math homework? Danny offered, which was apparently not the diplomatic response the situation called for. This equation, Claxon continued, holding up the napkin like it was either a sacred relic or a piece of evidence in a cosmic crime, has been the focus of the greatest mathematical minds in 17 galaxies. We've built entire research facilities around solving it. We've founded universities. We've created new fields of study. The Andromedan Science Collective has been working on this problem for longer than your species has existed. Dr. Cerebrax, the floating brain in a jar, had been unusually quiet during this revelation. Now he spoke up, his voice carrying what Danny was beginning to recognize as the universal tone of academic embarrassment. Professor Brightbrain, I hate to compound your current emotional state, but we need to discuss the practical implications of this discovery. Practical implications. Claxon's laugh had an edge of hysteria that made Danny slightly concerned for everyone's safety. Dr. Cerebrax, the practical implication is that we can now build faster-than-light drives with the mathematical complexity of a high school algebra problem. Do you understand what this means for galactic civilization? Within the hour, word had spread throughout the conference. Alien engineers were frantically redesigning their theoretical faster-than-light engines. Physicists were having nervous breakdowns as they realized that the universe was apparently much simpler than they'd thought. The economic implications alone were staggering, considering that entire sectors of the galactic economy had been built around the assumption that faster-than-light travel was impossibly complex. Danny found himself surrounded by a growing crowd of alien academics, all of whom seemed to want to either worship him or dissect him for scientific purposes. Ambassador Tentacula was frantically trying to establish trade agreements with Earth, based on humanity's apparent mathematical superiority, while Dr. Steinberg was taking notes for what would undoubtedly become the most important xenobiological paper in human history. The first test flight is scheduled for tomorrow, announced Dr. Quilbert, who had recovered enough from his existential crisis to start organizing practical applications. Using Mr. Martinez's corrected equation, we should be able to travel from here to the Andromeda Galaxy in approximately 6 hours instead of the previously calculated 47,000 years. 6 hours? Danny asked, suddenly very aware that he was now somehow responsible for revolutionizing galactic transportation. That's like faster than my commute to work when there's traffic. The test flight was by all accounts a spectacular success. The experimental ship, hastily reconfigured using the corrected equation, successfully jumped to Andromeda, took some tourist photos, and returned in time for dinner. The pilot, a brave Rigelian named Captain Zoomfast, reported that the experience was surprisingly smooth, like riding in a really good elevator that happens to travel through hyperspace. Professor Claxon, meanwhile, had progressed from denial through anger and bargaining, and was now somewhere between depression and acceptance. He sat in the conference room, staring at the napkin that had changed everything, occasionally making small sounds that might have been laughter or might have been the mathematical equivalent of a nervous breakdown. You know what the worst part is? He said to Danny, who was trying to figure out how to explain to his students back home that he'd accidentally become the most important mathematician in galactic history. The worst part is that it's elegant. Your solution is beautiful in its simplicity. It's everything mathematics should be, and we missed it because we were too busy being clever. Danny patted the alien professor awkwardly on what he hoped was a shoulder. Hey, look on the bright side. At least now you know that sometimes the answer really is as simple as it looks. That's got to be worth something, right? 3 months later, Danny Martinez was back in his classroom at Riverside Community College, trying to explain basic quadratic equations to a group of students who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else in the universe. Which, thanks to his recent contribution to galactic mathematics, was now a much larger range of options than it used to be. Mr. Martinez, asked Jessica, a student who had somehow managed to make it to college-level math without understanding that numbers could be negative, why do we need to learn this stuff? When are we ever going to use it in real life? Danny looked at the equation on the whiteboard, then at the framed napkin hanging on his office wall, then back at his students. The napkin had been specially preserved by the Galactic Academic Council and was now considered one of the most important mathematical documents in known space. The irony was not lost on him. Well, he said, trying to keep a straight face, you never know when you might accidentally solve a problem that the greatest minds in the galaxy have been working on for half a century. Happened to me just last Tuesday. The students laughed, assuming he was joking. If only they knew. The truth was, Danny's life had changed in ways that were both cosmic and completely mundane. He was now officially Earth's ambassador of mathematical simplicity, a title that came with a decent salary bump and absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do with it. The Galactic Academic Council had offered him a position as Director of Applied Common Sense, but Danny had politely declined, pointing out that he had a semester to finish and Mrs. Henderson in Algebra 2 really needed to pass or she'd have to retake the class. His phone buzzed with a message from Professor Claxon, who had become something of a pen pal since the conference. The alien mathematician had undergone what could only be described as a complete philosophical transformation, abandoning his life of academic pretension to become what he called a mathematical minimalist. His latest message read, Danny, I have successfully taught my nephew basic arithmetic using only 3 symbols and a fruit analogy. I am experiencing what you humans call joy. Please advise on how to handle this emotion responsibly. Danny smiled and typed back, congratulations Claxon. Try not to overthink it. The fastest ship in the galaxy was now capable of traveling between star systems in less time than it took Danny to drive to work, all because he'd noticed that negative times negative equals positive, not negative. The economic implications were still being calculated by alien economists who kept having to stop and lie down when they realized how much money had been wasted on unnecessarily complicated solutions. Earth had suddenly become the go-to destination for mathematical consultation, with alien civilizations sending their most complex problems to humanity for what they called the fresh perspective treatment. Danny had started a small consulting business on the side, though most of his solutions involved pointing out that the aliens were making things way more complicated than they needed to be. His favorite case had been the Betelgeuse trade dispute, where 2 alien civilizations had been arguing for 3 centuries about a contract that contained what they claimed was an unsolvable mathematical paradox. Danny had taken one look at it and pointed out that they'd forgotten to carry the one. The resulting peace treaty was now known as the Martinez Accords. Mr. Martinez, called out Kevin, a student who had once asked if algebra was contagious, are you really famous in space? Kevin, I solved one equation on a napkin. That hardly makes me famous. But didn't they name a space station after you? Danny sighed, they had indeed named a space station after him. The Danny Martinez Memorial Center for Not Overthinking Things was currently orbiting Jupiter and served as a reminder to alien mathematicians everywhere that sometimes the most obvious answer was the correct one. The fact that it was called a memorial center while he was still alive was apparently a translation error that everyone found too amusing to correct. As class ended, and his students filed out, probably to go home and complain about how math was stupid and they'd never use it in real life, Danny reflected on the absurdity of his situation. He had become the most celebrated mathematician in galactic history, not because he was brilliant, but because he wasn't smart enough to overcomplicate things. His evening was interrupted by a video call from Dr. Cerebrax, the floating brain who had become something of a celebrity after publicly admitting that humans might actually have something to contribute to galactic civilization. Danny, the brain said, his voice carrying what might have been excitement if floating brains could experience excitement, we have a new problem. The Rigelian Science Academy has been working on a unified theory of everything for 800 years, and they think they're close to a breakthrough. Would you mind taking a look? Danny glanced at the stack of papers to grade on his desk, then at the clock, then at the bottle of definitely not alien wine he kept for special occasions. Sure, he said, reaching for a fresh napkin. But I'm warning you, if this turns out to be another case of someone forgetting basic order of operations, I'm charging double. As he settled in to potentially revolutionize physics again, Danny couldn't help but chuckle at the cosmic joke of it all. Somewhere in the galaxy, the greatest minds of 17 different species were probably making their problems infinitely more complex than they needed to be, while he, a community college math teacher with a hangover and a napkin, had accidentally become the voice of mathematical sanity. The universe, as it turned out, had a sense of humor. It just took a human to point it out.